cinema rolled into one. It's just waiting to be turned into a film. His book is there, so go do, have it signed, buy the books after this. But when I was reading it, I was really reminded of Hyun Sang going to new societies, new cultures, new alien worlds, and bringing back stories of that to an absolutely bewildered and incredulous audience. And that's how I felt reading The Money Trap, because it's really an insider's view into a completely world on steroids. And at the same time, it's also like someone who was participating in that. So if he was not Genghis Khan, he was at least the general of Genghis Khan. So that's the kind of vibe the book has. It takes us into billion-dollar deals, into massive roller coaster rises, spectacular falls, Silicon Valley, Wall Street on speed, people just driven by vision, self-belief, a no-rules world, as we were talking earlier. So this really has been an evening of decoding two people, absolute mega mavericks, as our invitation said, Donald Trump on the one hand, and at the heart of this world that Alok talks about is a man called Masayoshi Son, who is the legendary investor and founder of SoftBank, which really drove the kind of technological evaluations that we have heard of, where $1 billion did not matter, and you had to have $100 billion to make a dent. So to understand that world, and as we sit, in a way, it really synapses with synapse, because like I said, we feel this is an alien world, but it is changing everything as we live and breathe. It changes us while we sleep, and we can't but engage with this, understand it, celebrate it, debate it. So ladies and gentlemen, to discuss this world, please welcome on stage Alok Sama. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to ask my team actually. No, they have a favorite camera angle for the speaker. So I think that's a good one, yes.
That was quite a build-up. And to tear people away from Johnny Walker and jalebis, you need it, I guess.
Yeah. But so Alok, as I was describing this world, it's really a billion and now $1 trillion world. At this very moment, there's one company, NVIDIA, whose market cap is 3-point-something trillion dollars, and that's possibly more than the GDP of India is. So that gives us a sense of what is this world that Alok Sama helped create, build, and then reneged from. So Alok, let me drop you into. First, let's get the masala, and then we'll come to the substantive bits. Drop us into the most absolutely ethereal, outlandish experience you had while you were the chief financial officer at SoftBank. Give us a sort of, color view into what that world was.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Will you speak into the mic?
Sorry. NVIDIA, which you mentioned, Son wanted to buy the company, and I did all the analytics and the numbers.
Sorry, can you all hear him?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
all good? Okay, yeah. So we could have bought the company for $83 billion, which is a obscene, ridiculous amount of money, but obviously it's worth 83. But, it's worth over $3 trillion. But to answer your question, the most outlandish moment from a deal-making perspective is Masa had this fascination for microchips. So I tell this story about when he was a teenager, he saw a picture on the cover of a magazine, and it brought tears to his eyes. And for most people of his generation, which is sort of my generation, he's not that much older than me, when he said that, I thought maybe he's talking about the cover of, Playboy or Penthouse magazine or something. And what was it that excited this teenager so much? It was actually the Intel 880 chip. So he had this fascination for chips. And the company that he really wanted to buy is called ARM Holdings, which is probably the most important company most people in this room may not have heard of. So if you've got a smartphone, and I see a lot of people do, can see them flashing, your average smartphone would have somewhere between 6 to 10 ARM design chips. So it is a company that sits at the epicenter of the world of technology. And he was completely fascinated by this, wanted to buy the company. And in the summer of 2016, we did a lot of preparation, sold some assets. He wanted to make his move. And This is midsummer. It was now or never. He decided, I'm ready. I've got the cash. We've got to do it now. Midsummer 2016, 4th of July weekend, which week before, Son decides, okay, we're going to make our move now. Brexit had just happened. The UK, so ARM is a UK-listed company, by the way, headquartered in the UK. Brexit had just happened. The government's in disarray. Flying in simultaneously, landing in this sleepy backwater of the Turkish Riviera. The place is completely deserted. Nobody wants to come to Turkey because of the terrorist attack. And it's a 4th of July weekend, right? I mean, literally, nobody's there, right? And we land in there, and he sent his personal valet ahead, and he booked this restaurant. He'd booked the entire restaurant, not just a table, he'd booked the entire restaurant. And we meet the chairman and the CEO of the company, and we present this bid for $32 billion to buy this company. I mean, I did all the talking, and then we negotiated, and we met with the prime minister, the finance minister, and within 6 weeks, the deal was done. In terms of sheer audacity, that was probably the wackiest moment in terms of deal making.
Yeah. I'm going to take you into weirder moments that you have possibly forgotten, but I just wanted to share with the audience that they did this deal at a 44% premium on what the company was really worth. But that's a kind of bet that Masayoshi Son was making, and I think it yielded $100 billion of profit.
You're spot on. So on a mark-to-market basis, I thought, and this is the difference between me and Masa, who's a true visionary. The company was, I don't want to venture into kind of finance geek speak, but the stock was, well, expensive, 48 times earnings. On top of that, Shoma, you're absolutely right. We had to pay a premium when you buy control of a company. You have to pay above market. It's like, you love a house, but if the owner doesn't want to sell, you've got to give him a pretty hefty price. So we paid a lot for the company, which seemed outrageous at the time, but his mark-to-market gain, you're absolutely right, is just over $100 billion as we sit here today, which is quite remarkable.
Right.
Yeah.
So, just for us to understand how familiar the audience is with the world that Alok is describing, like I said, I forgot to say it in the introduction, he was Chief Financial Officer of SoftBank, and the big cherry on that cake was that they created a vision fund for $100 billion of investment, which really also drove the turbo tech charge of technology valuations in India. Alok was kind of sidestepped from that, and that's a whole other story. But before we get into that, I just wanted to show of hands so that Alok can understand, just how much detail to go into, how to assume that you know some of the stuff. So how many of you would raise your hand? How many of you know of Masayoshi Son? Okay, so not that many. That's a good sobering thought for you, Alok. Yeah. So then we need to kind of talk a little bit about the company and him. So then let's start with him. Yep. When I was asking you about a color world, Alok has this very evocative line in his book where he said this was a world that was about talking cats and raining fish, and to be called normal was a cruel world. So that's the world we are describing. For me, I would have picked the Mark Zuckerberg talking about his challenges, or the president with whom you were doing a safari just before the arms deal. So do share some of those color anecdotes with the audience before we talk a little bit about Masayoshi.
Yeah, so the Zuckerberg anecdote, and I just wanted to make the point that some of these people who, these names you hear about and at times idolize up close and personal, they're, let's just say they're not normal people. And with Zuckerberg, you had dinner with him in Masa's private dining room. There was a very small group of people. And he starts, sort of a surreal moment, he starts talking about his annual challenges. So basically every year he sets himself a challenge. And when he started talking about that, I said, okay, I had vaguely heard about things like, I'm going to wear a tie this year, or I'm going to learn Mandarin. Anyways, it turns out he tells the story about his challenge that particular year, which is, actually it was the previous year, that I'm not going to eat meat unless it's an animal I've killed myself. And then he starts to tell the story about how he was in a restaurant and he wanted to eat chicken. And he had to arrange for a chicken to be brought in, which he strangled with his bare hands. He shot a bison, and he had the meat pickled, which fed him for 6 months. And with the bison, he had the bison beheaded, had the head stuffed. And just as a joke, this is like, that Godfather scene when you chop off a horse's head and you put it next to the guy's bed. They put it in Sheryl Sandberg. Sheryl was his number 2 chief operating officer of Facebook. So this is like a childish, completely, kind of college frat prank. So the stuffed head of the bison was placed on the wall, mounted on the wall in her office. And she came in and found this. And it was just a bizarre story. It's like a really, really strange dude.
Yeah. But the reason I asked you to tell it is that it kind of gives an insight into this world that's playing with $1 trillion, investments of billions of dollars, driven by a largely and almost entirely male club that's riding on testosterone. And just, again, to just give us sort of sense of the world you inhabited, that you were also on a safari, like I said, with an American president.
No, I wasn't on a safari with him. We're talking about Teddy Roosevelt. He's long gone. So I read about him. It's an interesting story. So it is, for those of you who read the book, I do kind of go off on streams of consciousness. The Teddy Roosevelt thing is I'm on a safari.
I'm talking about the Calvin.
Yeah. Calvin Cotter was my guide. But the American president I'm talking about, someone I'd read about. He wasn't with me on the safari. So this is Teddy Roosevelt, and by all counts, a great American president. And I was just, I read his book in preparation for going on the safari, and it turns out this gentleman with his big elephant gun, which he called his big stick, had shot 512 animals, including little black and white monkeys. Just blew him away. And I kind of threw that in. It's a bit of a stream of consciousness thing. Is this, kind of an outrageous display of so-called masculinity, which is just very American. But that was just an amusing. And then I kind of go off on a tangent talking about, does every moon have a dark side, which is a theme I try and unpack throughout the book.
So Alok, you came from a middle-class professional background. And you enter into this world, of course, through Wall Street and through, Morgan Stanley and etc. Yeah. But when you signed up at SoftBank, were you at all sort of expecting the world that you got thrown into? And you have this very ironic take in the book right through. You're watching yourself, an actor in this game, but you're also sort of evaluating some of the absurdity of what goes on. So.
Yeah, it is. So just to for those of you, some of you in the audience know me, my background is, I'm from Delhi. First 21 years of my life, I barely traveled outside Delhi. My father was, in very early days, he was a lecturer and then an assistant professor at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. So, and he was, as you said, later on, he had his own practice and his own nursing home, but, came from very, very modest middle-class roots. And so for me to go off on this journey is... At every stage, it seemed sort of surreal. Like, riding around in planes, doing these ridiculous deals. And I was brought into SoftBank by a friend of mine who's also a very strong Delhi connection. One of my closest friends, Nikesh Arora, who some of you may have heard of. He was chief business officer of Google and one of the brightest people I've ever met, by the way. And joined SoftBank to be to be successor to Masayoshi Son. And Nikesh was not only a friend, I dealt with him professionally as a banker in his former incarnation when he was at T-Mobile and then at Google, and he brought me in. So that's how I entered this world. And but for me, candidly, from age 21 onwards, with a little bit of sort of being in Wonderland, just being thrown into one wacky situation after another. So you're right to pick up on this. There's a certain, throughout the book, there's this sense of the absurd in terms of the people I meet and the things I encountered, and it turns backward. There's a very strong dose of India through the book. Come here, and Masa, for those of you who may not be familiar, he was very bullish, particularly when Nikesh was around. Very big on India. We met with Modi. I described my meeting with Masa and I meeting with with Narendra Modi, made a pledge of $10 billion in 10 years, always big numbers. So in India is an important piece of that journey. But again, even with the India journey, there was all kinds of weird things that went down.
Yeah, I'm going to come into the India picture, but just, to familiarize the audience.
About Masa-san?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I just want to share with the audience that, I wanted to discuss Masayoshi Son because I think he's a kind of absolute embodiment of a world that we are talking about. Men who literally dream up a future, have no rules, tremendous amount of money. So, what is the psyche of these people? Because, as I said, they are really shaping who we are and what we do and what we can do while we sleep, and we are not keeping an eye on that at all. So Masa, in fact, is like a cinematic story of that, and I'd love to share. He's really a fantastic character.
He's a really interesting character to unpack. So he comes from beyond modest. I mean, he's not actually Japanese, he's Korean. His father was Korean immigrant, and being a Korean in Japan is the equivalent, sadly, of being an untouchable at, hopefully things are better now, but at the worst point in India's history. I mean, it was really, really bad. I mean, his father, that is, couldn't hold a regular job. You had to go and register. I mean, it was a little bit like, for those of you familiar with the Jim Crow rules of the American South in terms of how African Americans were treated, it was literally like that. So he came from that background and was fascinated by the world of technology, obsessed with the world of technology. And what sets him apart is, we use this term visionary quite loosely, but he was, for me, a true visionary, a futurist. Right, and I'll give you examples of that. He has this uncanny knack of looking around corners and identifying correctly technology megatrends. So the origins of SoftBank were he foresaw the PC revolution, personal computers, and set up this company first in Japan as a distributor of Microsoft software. So that's how he made his mark. That's how he set up this company. SoftBank, people assume, is a bank. It's not a bank. The origin of the name is a bank for software. So that's how SoftBank came about. Then his next big visionary bet, was around the internet. And that was in the mid-90s, 1996, he made a $100 million investment in a company called Yahoo. And for those of you who are old enough to remember, kind of those days, early days of the internet, Yahoo was it was the portal to the internet, right? So that turned out to be a phenomenally successful bet. And at the height of the internet bubble, Son was the richest man in the world. He's richer than Bill Gates, and he owned 7 to 8% of all internet stocks. Crashed and burned after that. He was in the Guinness Book of World Records as having lost the most money ever.
He lost 95% of his wealth.
Exactly. And that record stood until 2020.
When?
To Elon Musk beat him. Actually, 2023, Elon Musk beat him. Elon recovered very quickly.
So
right?
he lost like $95 billion?
No, it was, I think the number was $67 billion, which is what he lost.
Yeah, but we're talking 2000,
Yeah, he told a story, by the way, I relate this in the book. He told this story to an audience of 2,000 people in Delhi at a Hindustan Times summit, and among other people, Amitabh Bachchan was in the audience, and I described, but for me, he was my idol. I mean, so I described meeting, when Masa relayed this story, Amitabh Bachchan, I introduced the Big B to Masa Son, and I still remember Amitabh's words to him, and he said, "You're the real star, Mr. Son," after he told that story. But anyhow, coming back to the Masa Son story, so he made a huge comeback, and his comeback was based on yet another visionary bet. He bought this really messed up Japanese company, Vodafone Japan. And this company was bleeding cash, and it was such a terrible business. Vodafone, the parent company, actually lent him, let's think about how absurd this is, they lent him $6 billion to buy the company from him, and the rest he borrowed. And with very little of his own money, he bought this company, and it was all based on a handshake from Steve Jobs, who he knew. And the commitment from Steve Jobs is whenever Apple Steve comes up with the iPhone, he would give Masa the exclusive for the iPhone in Japan. And on the strength of that, he turned this terrible money-losing business into an incredible success story, right? I mean, his mark-to-market gain was over $40 billion. So that was his comeback. Then he...
I just wanted to emphasize something in that story to the audience, that it really struck me when I read about this, that, and for me, it's not just individualized, it's really an insight into this world also, that at that point, Steve Jobs did not have the iPhone product, Masa Son did not have a telephone company, and here were two people shaking hands on things which didn't exist, and based that, Masa went and bought Vodafone at a valuation of 4 times what his own company was by borrowing money from Vodafone to buy Vodafone, you know, so...
It's brilliant. Thank you for summarizing that, by the way. That really, those additional facts really emphasize the absurdity of that. So, but the point I'm making is, this was before the iPhone existed, and he actually went to Steve Jobs, and he'd drawn out this thing that looked like an iPhone. And Steve Jobs' exact response, as relayed by Masa, and I've talked to people who were in there who corroborated the story, Steve Jobs basically said, Masa, this is ugly. If I do something like this, I'll come up with something beautiful. And he did, right? Then came Alibaba, which is arguably the most successful venture investment in history, $40 million, which when Son San eventually liquidated his investment in Alibaba. And for Alibaba, those of you who are not familiar, sort of the Amazon of China is the easiest way to describe it, even though its business model is a little bit different. And his realized gain on that was $72 billion. I mean, these are mind-blowing numbers by any standard. So he saw that coming. And then again with AI. AI is all the rage. And by the way, I'm happy to talk about AI and the hype around AI. I know that's something you're very interested in unpacking, maybe not here, but in some of the other things you do. You know, he was talking about obsessively about singularity, this idea of machine learning overtaking human intelligence 10 years ago in 2014. And I didn't take him seriously at the time, but it all turned out to be very real. And this company he bought, Arm, which is the acquisition I talked about, that success story, Arm is now, the reason Arm is worth what it is now it's positioned as the designer of AI chips at the edge of the network. And by the edge, I mean smartphones, autonomous cars, which is how all of us will interact with AI in the future.
Yeah.
So some remarkable successes, all kind of identifying mega trends well in advance.
Yeah. So Alok, again, I just wanted us to personalize Masa a little more for the audience. So you were talking about his investment history, but help the audience understand the absolutely, like a kind of mosaic psyche of the man. Like what were the big headline lines that you can, if you were to describe Masa in like 5 minutes, the entire complexity of the man?
So the best way to understand him is actually take his own words. One of the remarkable things about him is what you see is what you get. I mean, he says outrageous things, whatever comes to his mind. He doesn't have too much of a filter, right?
So do you think Trump and he are similar on that? What would your secret memo of Trump have been?
He met with Trump too, by the way, but that's a different story. His only feedback after meeting Trump was how impressed he was with Ivanka. She made much more of an impression than Trump did. But any case, coming back to Masa, he describes himself as, I'm the crazy guy who lives in the future. And that really says it all. He is this crazy guy who lives in the future, and he makes this futuristic bets. He also has an incredible talent to get really granular from an operational perspective. I remember being in a meeting with him. We also owned an acquisition which started off completely on the wrong foot. He bought this company in the US, Sprint, which was the number 4 phone carrier. And things were not going well, and he was kind of microscopic focused on all aspects of Sprint. I remember being in a meeting with him, and he had, with his engineering team, identified a blind spot in the downtown network in a shopping mall downtown Houston. and he was able to identify that to them and tell them, like, here's how you fix it. This fixation on on details is quite incredible. And then, most importantly, for me, he was fun. I mean, I was hanging out with him and played golf. Actually, twice we played golf right here in DLF, and I just had fun with him.
Right. So, Alok, for me, actually, when I was reading your analysis of him, and I wanted to spotlight those aspects because I think, again, it'll help the audience understand, like I said, the kind of mindset of the people who are really shaping the world now. There were 4 or 5 headline things that you said about him. One was his philosophy that the world is divided into hunters and cooks. And, you unfortunately fell in the cook category, but he liked being a hunter. So I wanted you to explain that. And also that his maxim of his philosophy in life was happiness for everyone, So just like how delusional is that, or how real was that? And I think you also speak about the fact that when he lost money, $60 billion, he just laughed about it because the money meant nothing. His kind of compass lies elsewhere. So give us an indication of that. What does it mean when you can play with trillions of dollars and you're literally shaping the destiny of the world?
Yeah. So if you get on SoftBank's website today, their corporate website, you will see that their corporate mission, this sounds really strange when I say it, the corporate mission is happiness for everyone, right? And it has a different meaning in Japanese, so it's not quite as whatever,
sort of chicken
strange,
soup for the soul.
Yeah, exactly, quite as strange as it might sound. But fundamentally what he's getting at is technology as a way to improve lives.
As a way to?
As a way to improve lives, right? I mean, there's an idealism. And, we go back in history of technology, whether it's Gutenberg's printing press or Edison's light bulb, these things were transformational. And that's how he thinks. So for him, it's not about how much money am I making here, there, or whatever. He's lost his way, as he said himself, when he was midway through the Vision Fund, and that's when some of the mistakes were made. We'll talk about that. But there is this idealism, which I personally find as a quality really, really attractive. The hunters and cooks thing is very interesting. In all humility, I'm a nerdy, geeky guy. I mean, I trained as a mathematician, and then I was a finance guy, and now I'm a wannabe writer, kind of different mindset. I don't have the same visionary capability. I'm not sure anyone does, to be quite honest. I mean, I'm maybe Dhirubhai Ambani did in terms of thinking on a grand scale. It's a very rare quality, and he had that, and that's what he means by hunters. And he was kind of urging me to be a little bit more like that. And we had some fun discussions around this, and my main point to him was, Son, I mean, if I became a hunter, I mean, who's going to hold you in check, right? And but kind of towards when he was so caught up in the Vision Fund, there was a real sense that people like me were holding him back, right? And there was a side of me that says, like, who am I to tell him what to do? Because I wouldn't have told him to make the Alibaba investment or perhaps even do the ARM deal, which I executed, but I wouldn't have the courage to make that bold of a bet. And he was right, of course. Right. So I could have, perhaps if he'd listened to me, maybe some of the mistakes, WeWork, etc. Not just me, other people told him too, that the WeWork, for example, was not a great idea. If he'd listened, he might have saved himself tens of millions of dollars. But then again, the same people would have held him back from doing deals on which he made hundreds of billions. So right. that's the conundrum. That's the complexity of Masa-san.
Yeah, I'm going to come back. I just again wanted to share detail with the audience about Masa, and I'm again, I think we are using him, like I said, like a symbol of an entire world. That this great Alibaba deal, which many people say that actually literally funded the tech boom of India, the amount of money he made on the Alibaba deal. Again, he backed Jack Ma, using a phrase from your book, just because of his strong and shining eyes, and that he did not have a business plan. But he put in $20 million into Jack Ma at a time when no one else was really betting on it. And he ended up making $78 billion on that. But he could have sold it at $200 billion. He didn't because he has that kind of passionate, attachment to. So, this kind of betting, or you've used the example of Uber. where he, again, Alok and others were assessing that Uber and these hail riding cabs did not have that kind of valuation. But Masa was thinking about a world where there will be no ownership of cars, there will be no drivers, and then how much will these companies be worth, So I was finding that very interesting insights into his character.
It is. That's a great example. So I give the example. It's actually very interesting to talk about, and I'll explain why. Because, in some ways we've come a full circle. Things have happened since I wrote the book, right? I mean, like 6 months is a lifetime in the world of technology. But I talk in the book about one of the first deals I did at SoftBank was Ola. So I'm sitting there negotiating with Bhavish.
Can everyone hear Alok at the back?
Yeah.
Sorry, okay, maybe I'm...
Yeah, I need to be careful about speaking into this. I need to just... Okay, but coming back to the Ola story, so I negotiated that deal with Bhavish sitting in a bar in Tokyo. And I'd done the analytics, and I'd had this conversation with Masa. Now, when you look at businesses, when you try and value businesses, typically you look at cash flows, you project how much money the company is going to make. That just kind of goes out the window when a company doesn't have any cash flow. I mean, it's just bleeding money, and it's in a kind of a head-to-head fight with Uber. Uber's bleeding money. Ola's bleeding money. There was another competitor there, Taxi for Sure, is bleeding money. I start to look at the size of the taxi market in India and how many people are going to, which isn't huge by any stretch, and how many people are going to stop using taxis and gravitate towards ride-hailing. Lots of issues. Will women do it, for example? Cultural issues, safety issues. And I start to make some projections and come up with a value of basically nothing. I don't get it. Love India, but I can see the macro arguments. And the point he made was, no, look, you got to imagine a world where, so step back. If you look at the Ola, the Uber business model, if you go on any one of these rides and you pay 100 rupees, rough approximation, 70% of that goes to the driver, right? So Masa's point was, imagine a world where you have autonomous cars, right? If you have autonomous cars, then that 70% leakage goes away, right? And that's the point he was making, which is futuristic, right? I mean, kind of imagining a world where there's no drivers. You've got to make judgments about who owns these autonomous cars, what are the costs associated with that. But when you start thinking like that, you very quickly realize you actually can't really value this business at all. So it's a complete leap of faith. So my negotiation with Bhavish was, what was your last round? What have you done since then? This number, that number, someone else is paying that. It was horse trading, literally, right? I mean, it was like going to a shopping mall and, kind of a bargaining for whatever, and it was, you really have to throw all the analytics out the window. The point I might make about how this has all come to full circle is, I was in San Francisco a month ago, and Maya, it's my wife, and I rode in a Waymo. Now, Waymo is Google's autonomous car company, which is now operating a commercial service in San Francisco. And Waymo also has an agreement with Uber to operate an autonomous car service to start with. I assume they're doing this alphabetically in 2 American cities, Austin and Atlanta, major American cities. And I was more than a little bit apprehensive. Maya was even more apprehensive. But we got in it, so we got to try it. I'm supposed to be sort of a technologist. We got to try it. So we did. And I've never felt safer in a car. It was an incredible experience in every way. I mean, first thing, if you go out, some of you might order an Uber. First challenge is you step out, and how do you know which is your car? I mean, kind of 90% of these cars seem to be white. Well, with a Waymo, there's a sign there. There was a sign there with my initials, right? It's not that complicated when you think about it. It's the same like, for hire signs, the way you have on cabs. There's a sign there with my initials, great start. I get in. It's a little bit spooky, but you get in. There's a really friendly voice that greets you, very soothing voice. Greets you by your name and tells you to fasten the seatbelt. You fasten your seatbelt. In front of you is a nice screen. You can pick the temperature. You can choose what music you want to listen to. The roof is all glass. The car glides It's all electric, so it
I want to
glides
ask you-
peacefully. Yeah, yeah.
Just while you're cooking up this dream world, you're sounding a little bit like Masa. Have you
Yeah.
invested in Waymo?
I could. It's all owned. It's 100% owned by
Google?
Google. Nobody
Oh,
can. It's actually a great example.
But would it work in India?
I think the learning curve is going to be the challenge with learning in India is it's a traffic light or a lane is no more than a helpful suggestion to average Indian driver. Right?
Yeah.
So yes, you can certainly see how a machine would be completely confounded by human behavior.
Yeah.
So these are all machine learning algorithms. So the learning curve with India has got to be it's going to be
I think
complicated.
India is going to save the world finally, with
there you
its
go.
sheer anarchy. It's very comforting, yeah.
But this thing, particularly since we're all fascinated by artificial intelligence, let me just spend a minute on it. I mean, we're all, the standards we set for autonomous cars, for example, are actually way higher than the standards we set for ourselves in terms of the damage we can do. I mean, just think about that. I mean, kind of driving after you've had one drink is not such a big deal. I mean, like cars, autonomous cars, self-driving cars will not make that mistake, and they will go by the rules.
Sure, but that's opening up a whole other can of worms,
I
because
don't wanna
then
digress,
I'll
but-
ask you what's going to happen to all the people who get displaced and, all the
It's a
labor
very interesting
issues.
discussion in India. Better get ready. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but right now I just want to come back to two or three things in the book.
Yeah.
One is that,
It's
we were
ironic. I love the fact that you're bringing me back to my book, but thank you.
But, we've been building up Masa for all the visionary end of him. But in your book, you do give him a bit of an easy ride, because there's also the flip side to visionaries like this. And I wanted to ask you, what was that experience of working with him? Was there also kind of narcissism, of gaslighting, of not being able to actually say did you have a Stockholm syndrome? That when he was doing bad investments, none of you had the courage to also speak up, So give us the other flip side. And like I said, this is not just individualizing him. In a way, he's a kind of, he's an example of this entire universe. So share some of the darker side of the moon as well.
I think it's fair to say that I do. I mean, the book is not meant to be an objective biography or analysis. It's really my memoir. It's my story, right? So, and I have my biases. So if my wife comes across as close to perfection, that's my bias, right? So. And I'm very fond of Masa, and I have sometimes the qualities you admire in other people are the things that you don't have. And with him, this visionary idealism is something I really admired. So I probably do place him on a bit of a pedestal, and I think others in the media in particular probably be a lot more critical than I am. But I think I'm pretty objective about describing his failures, and once again, I'm going to sound like a Masa fanboy, but one of the cool things about him is he himself does not lack self-awareness. So he screwed up a lot, and then he basically came out and said exact words, which is being documented in the media, is I'm ashamed of myself for being elated by the successes of the past. Exact words. The Greeks would call that hubris, sin of pride. You've been so successful, you get carried away, you think you're infallible, and you make mistakes. And he did make mistakes. He had the most spectacular blow-up was WeWork, which he lost over $10 billion on, right? So I think I do document those mistakes very clearly, and that is part of the complexity of Masa Son, because not only did he go through that phase where it seemed as if he'd blown up a second time, unbelievably, because he literally blew up, Guinness Book of World Records, most money ever. That was over 20 years ago. And to do something approaching that again is, wow. It's strange, to say the least. It's this Greek myth of Icarus flying too close to the sun, but the remarkable part of the remarkable thing about that Masa-san story is you fly too close to the sun, you get burnt, you crash, you fly again, you get burnt, you crash, and guess what? He's flying again. And the ARM deal, $100 billion plus game, in the venture business, it only takes one, and his big bets have been so spectacularly successful that he's flying higher than ever. today.
Yeah, but again, I wanted to, just share with the audience that this vision fund that Alok is speaking of, the $100 billion of technology investments, was the largest fund in the history of investment funds.
Yeah, you put up. I think you had a slide, which is an important slide. So the Vision Fund raised in 2017 was 100 billion, and the total volume of venture investments in 2016 in the United States was 67 billion. That puts it in perspective. I mean, the scale of what he did, and I think you had that information in the slide too. $1 billion fund in the Valley was a very big deal. The Vision Fund was doing individual deals of over $1 billion. So this was quite transformative for the Valley. Not just, I mean, Valley in terms of the size of funds, but it was transformative everywhere, including India.
Yeah. I wanted to come to the India story, but I just do want to leave the audience with one headline figure, which is that the Vision Fund, which was really funded the Sheikh of Saudi Arabia, but Masa took that fund, funded a lot of the technology boom in India, but ended up with, correct me if I'm wrong, like a $23 billion loss in one quarter. Is that?
That was not just the first Vision Fund. I think a lot of the losses from a subsequent fund, but that's right. They did have that monumental loss in one quarter. That's when he came out and he made that statement.
I'm ashamed. Yeah.
I'm ashamed. And he basically said, I am going into, he's a colorful character. He basically said, I'm going into mourning. He says, I'm not going to invest anymore. I'm not even going to do my own quarterly earnings announcements. And he doesn't, he still doesn't. I mean, he's back in action, which he announced in the summer. But there was a lot of self-flagellation.
Right. So I want to come to the India story, which will be of interest to everybody. But before that, Alok, your title of your book says, Lost Illusions in the Tech World, So talk to us a little bit, and I'm going to come, I don't know how many of you know this, but the public story also is that Alok Sama and Nikesh Arora, who were literally the two Indian boys at the heart of this crazy world that we are discussing, there was a huge smear campaign, and both of them were sidelined, and we'll come to that story because it really is a whodunit. So we need to come to that. But before that, what was the lost illusion? Was it because of the smear campaign and the fact that Nikesh finally left SoftBank? You were sidelined from the Vision Fund. Was it all that corporate espionage, or did you just lose faith in the entire enterprise, the finance world, the financial engineering, the creativity, the lies, the self-dishonesty, all of that? What is it?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So it is my publisher didn't want that in the subtitle, the Lost
Because they knew
Illusion
Shoma would pick on it.
Well, no, not because they said, well, what does that mean? I have no idea what that means. And I said, well, it means something to me. And it is a obscure literary reference to a book that made a deep impression on me by French literary giant. Forgive me, I'm not trying to sound intellectual, but I just read a ridiculous amount and some things make an impact. But it's a book called Lost Illusions by Balzac, and that just made an impression on me because I related to it. The book is, and there have been a couple of movies made about it too, the book is about a teenager, rural France, who's thrown into Paris and the world of power and money. It's actually the world of journalism, which you will relate to better than I can. But it's thrown, broadly speaking, into power and money and what he sees and the mistakes he makes, and kind of comes back to his roots.
Yeah.
And
but don't tell us about Balzac right now because I'm running out of time.
But there's an element of that in my journey, right? Because I don't want to veer in that direction. But the book is a memoir, and for me, I wanted to write growing up. I used to read a lot, and if you grew up in India, I mean, I told my parents or anyone I want to be a writer, I would say you got to get your head examined. I mean, what are you going to do? Being an artist, I mean, you can't make a living, right? And for me, it's that whole journey that I was trying to capture. All of that, I mean, the money trap rhymes with the honey trap. There's actually a honey trap in the book. That's just, but the money trap is, that title, that piece of the title is really about people being caught up in this circle of greed and greed, money, but also more fundamentally
significance
is just over-indexing on the importance of money. It's very cliched to say it, But it's actually really interesting to me. I'm overwhelmed by the feedback in India, and I'm particularly intrigued by the number of very young people who are reading the book and read it and interpret and internalize this as something, and you and I talked about this, as something that's completely aspirational, which is, I want to be like this. And the message, I don't believe in books that try to sell you on a message, which is why, I'm just telling my story. But I'd like to think what people will take away is throughout this, I'm trying to be more than a little bit ironic. And I'm trying to make a point about the emptiness and the vacuousness of just this search for money and more money being the key driver, right? So,
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a very long-winded way of answering your question about what I mean by lost illusions.
Yeah, I'm going to just press you on that a little more, but I don't know how many of you, Alok and I were just chatting briefly earlier, and he was saying that young Indians have responded with this kind of feverish excitement about the book, literally like the dream world that they want to enter. And the flip side of it, which you didn't share just now, was that young American audiences, on the other hand, have moved more left, So it's like India, coming from a socialist past, literally wants to live this high capitalist world. And those who've seen the extremes of capitalism are kind of moving left of center, and the young over there feel that this is just the worst kind of world to live in, So it's a
really, really interesting observation. Learning for me, literally over the last few weeks, is I was at NYU on a graduate program for 2 years, and I was in there with a bunch of millennials, 20-somethings, and they're not just left-wing, they're outright communists. Right? I mean, I felt like, being at St. Stephen's College, hanging out with all those Bihari communists who wanted to, kind of have their own views on the world. But yeah, that's absolutely right. In India, I find it refreshing, the desire for upward mobility, and don't lose that, please. And that's my engagement with people. And I'm actually more than a little bit intimidating. I'm doing a podcast in Hindi. People have said, like, young people want to engage with you. It'll be a fun experience. But that's part of the message I want to try and deliver.
So, Alok, we've been talking about the high points of Masa. There are two very big parts we need to talk about before, and we're running out of time. One is the India story. The second is the entire downfall. It's this absolute litany of bad investment after bad investment after bad investment. So I want you to share with the audience what happens when you have that access to that level of money, that level of power. You're with Hollywood, you're with Tiger Woods, you're with presidents and prime ministers, you're flying into boats, and what happens to the psyche? And talk to us a little bit about Masa and a little about yourself, that when you were at the absolute peak, did you also have hubris, and did Masa have hubris? What led to that crazy downfall?
I think we've talked about this. I think he, in pretty much exact words, what he described, which is, ashamed of myself for being elated by the success, that's hubris, right? I don't think I had hubris because I was in there. I mean, I fell into this world. This is not a job I applied for or sought. It was relatively late in life. So I was for me, breaking away was incredibly easy. So it's very straightforward. We can talk about India if you want.
Yes, let's then go to India. I was going to see if you were going to delve deeper into that lost illusion cells. But
I mean, the one thing, it's straightforward. The venture game, you make 10 investments, you hope that one's going to be a home run, and 4 or 5 are going to be outright duds, and a few are going to be middling successes, right?
But Alok,
you're the big ones, right?
You're speaking of that, in terms of investments, but I don't think we'll have time for that. But I did want to talk about the financial engineering, the kind of self-serving fantasies that are built around the companies, and then the slash and burn that happens, like the world.
This is true. The dislocation, the misallocation of resources, and when you spend too much money, and then you've got to unravel, and people lose jobs, and anytime soon. And Nikesh had been hired based on a commitment from our side that he would step down and would be stepping down. His life plan was he'd step down when he was 60. And he's 67, Sonsan is that is, and still going strong. And when Nikesh realized that, he moved on, and he's done brilliantly since then. So, and with me, it was the smear campaign did legitimately hurt me in as much as it kept me out of the vision fund completely. But that was the ultimate blessing, because as it turns out, I mean, it's more accident. I'm not saying if I'd been part of the vision fund, things would have been different. Not at all. It's Masa as a force by himself, so I don't think I would have made a difference in terms of how things unfolded. But as it turns out, I spent time unraveling the U.S. telecom landscape, the Sprint team on Moja. That worked out fine. So I'm in a good place. Nikesh is in a good place. Nobody gets hurt. And sorry, it's a bit of a spoiler or not. I'm not going to speculate on who did it.
Right. Well, I just want a little insight again about living in this world. I'll just share in a line. I don't know how many of you know, but there was this huge sort of corporate attack that there was, a conflict of interest, investments where maybe there were kickbacks, all of it. There were, committees that were set up by SoftBank, by the board, and both Nikesh and Alok were completely cleared of that. There was a honey trap set up, which Nikesh didn't fall for. But there was a basic campaign to blacken their names, and there's an assumption, Wall Street Journal, others wrote about it in terms of, was it an insider job? Alok is not speaking of it because he has no evidence. But why I was saying that is it's again a piece of this world. And when I was saying downfall, I just meant that it definitely, sort of put a break on the...
It was not a happy period. I think we can agree on that. It was,
yes.
It was the one.
But what was your...
The one takeaway, a message to, again, people who aspire to be in this world is toughen up.
Is toughen up.
Yeah. I didn't, honestly, because I fell into this world by accident. I didn't seek it out. And in many ways, I was uncomfortable being in that role, being in that spotlight. But if you aspire to that kind of life, toughen up. People will take shots at you, and things will get really, really ugly. There are people here, Sunil Mittal, I've had a mentoring relationship with for a longest time. And he would tell me, he says, Alok, in India, I've dealt with these things all my career. You just got to take it in your stride. And I say, yeah, accept that, this is what you want to do. I'm just like, I don't want to deal with this. So if that's what you aspire to, that life, toughen up.
So just last thought, Alok, that there's this whole thing of vision, and then there's the inability to tell the truth. Yeah. So if today, looking back, would you take that ride again? Do you think that whether it's in politics, it's in technology, it's in the world of money, it's a very male energy, which, like you said, at one level it's visionary, but do you also think that there's just no scope for kind of truth-telling and a kind of tempering of that?
I think that's being overly cynical. I don't think it's quite that bad. From my perspective, look, I feel nothing but gratitude when I wake up every morning. My life in many ways has been a series of mostly fortunate accidents. The one point I will make to you, which I feel very strongly about, which hopefully you will relate to, and I say this from the perspective of, I have a daughter who's 29, is I do think that the world is Wall Street, technology, is way too testosterone laden.
Is too?
Testosterone laden.
Yeah, that's...
male egos, and they do stuff that's stupid, right? And I really believe if the gender ratio was reversed, the world would be a better place, and businesses would be better for it. And I really mean that sincerely. I think the pendulum and the good news for my daughter, for the next generation, yes, in my book, I describe a world that's run by men, but that is a legacy of the way the world was 20, 30 years ago. I think the world will be dramatically different because there's never been a better time to be a female in the workspace. And I think I have mentoring relationships with women in executive roles, and I tell them, and they know it, play the female card, because if there's a tie in the promotion or whatever, the nod will go to women. So the world has changed. The world of business has changed. And I have to say, I haven't experienced that in India, not to suggest it's not happening, but it is certainly very true in the US. And I find that very encouraging.
Right. That's a great note to end on.
Hopeful note to end on.
Yeah. I said that's a great note to end on. Coming from me, it sounds cynical. Coming from him, it sounds inspirational. That the world is too testosterone. But thank you so much, Alok. It's a riveting book. Let the bar is open, conversations can flow, and Alok will be signing books as you buy them. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.